Hello and welcome to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Tyler, and today we might touch on the Orioles getting swept by the Chicago Cubs, unfortunately, but I think I want to spend a lot of the time talking about a part of the roster that has me a little bit worried as of late. What's going on? How can the Orioles fix it? And where do we go from here? We'll get into that in just 1 second, but before we do that, I want to remind everybody about our sponsor for the episode, and that is Bet Online. BetOnline is your number one source for all of your sports betting needs this season. From baseball, golf, soccer, right to all of the top fights in UFC, MMA, and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. And when the game's over, you can head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. So head to the website today to get in on the action. Use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% free bet credit on your first deposit of up to $250. That's promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet Online, the game starts here. Thanks to our sponsor, Bet Online. All right. So, about the part of the Orioles roster that has me a little bit concerned right now. I don't think this is going to shock anybody, but the bullpen is a bit of a problem right now. The pitching staff in general is a problem, and they play together. The rotation, the bullpen, when one's hurting, it typically hurts the other one. But I do want to kind of focus on the bullpen for this episode. So what I did was I looked at the data going from June 21st till now. So, that includes the Houston Astros series. So the Orioles took 2 out of 3 from the Yankees. That was a big boost. Put them just, I think, a half game behind the Yankees at that time in the AL East. Then they went to Houston. Vibes were good. And the Astros took care of business. They smacked the Orioles around for 3 games. Orioles got swept for the second time in the season. They got swept by the Cardinals earlier, swept by the Astros there. And then now I'm recording the day after the Chicago Cubs sweep. So it's interesting that, a season ago, the Orioles got swept not at all until the playoffs, of course. And now this season, the team is basically on the same pace for wins, but will have been swept 3 times now, and twice in the span of basically 3 weeks, which is a lot. And it's important because I think it's well publicized that the Yankees are going through extreme struggles right now, like, talking about firing the manager, talking about firing the GM. I've heard some people say, oh, if they crater enough, they should sell at the deadline. They could sell Soto, get something for him now, and then sign him again in the offseason. Like, the Yankees fan base is kind of going berserk. But in the standings, the Orioles are only 2 games up on the Yankees right now. And the Orioles, while not struggling as much as the Yankees have recently, they haven't done that much better. I think they're 8-10 since the end of that New York series. Like I said, swept by the Astros, lost the series to the Guardians, got swept by the Cubs. So it hasn't been a great stretch for the Orioles either. Now, the Orioles also had to contend with a June in which they had 1 off day, which is just brutal. And now they are kind of faltering going into the All-Star break. They've got a huge series though this weekend against those New York Yankees that, you say the Orioles are coming into it in slightly better form in general, but the Yankees have won a game more recently than the Orioles have. So who's to say? And the Orioles' last series win was against the Athletics, who are not a very good baseball team. So the Orioles aren't going into this weekend feeling like, the absolute favorites to take 2 out of 3 or sweep the Yankees or whatever. It's going to be a tough weekend. But specifically, what has concerned me in recent weeks, people talk about, the injuries to the starting rotation. They talk about the lineup falls asleep sometimes, as it did against the Cubs this week. I think in general, the rotation, yes, it needs to be addressed, and I think I'm going to talk about that here. But you feel pretty good about your top 2. You feel good about Burns. You feel good about Rodriguez. I'm not going to say those are the absolute 2 top 1-2 punch in the league. I think Burns is up there as potentially the best starter in the AL. Rodriguez, I think, is a very good number 2. And, you get one more piece there. I think you're feeling pretty darn great about the Orioles rotation situation. I don't think you can say the same about the bullpen, where Craig Kimbrell has been very good. He had the early season wobble, and that had people a little bit worried. but apart from that has been very good, striking out a ton. Looks like, maybe not peak career Kimbrel because that's, Hall of Fame trajectory type stuff, but maybe a skosh below that, which I think the Orioles they have to be ecstatic about. And they have to think that team option for 2024 or 2025 rather looks pretty darn good with Felix Bautista coming back in 2025 as well. But besides Kimbrel, the rest of the bullpen to me feels pretty darn shaky. So what I did was looked at numbers from, as I said, the beginning of that Astros series through the Cubs series this week, sorted it or filtered it by just bullpen, so just relief pitchers. And since that time, the Orioles rank 17th in baseball with a 0.3 FWAR, but FWAR does get, funny depending on innings and stuff. Like even if you're struggling, if you throw a lot of innings, that has value. So if we look at a couple other metrics, if we sort by K per nine, that's an area where the Orioles are doing really well. They're striking out 10 batters, 10.19 strikeouts per nine, which is quite good. That's in the top 5 in baseball. Walks per nine, 3.03 per nine. That's 11th in baseball. So again, not great, but um better than their overall worth of the FWAR. Home runs is where they kind of struggle. They're giving up 1.52 home runs per nine. That is 24th in baseball. That's pretty terrible. Batting average on balls in play, they're 25th in baseball. 326 batting average on balls in play. Now, sometimes that is some, unluckiness. Other times it's because you're getting hit really hard. And you compare, 326 batting average on balls in play plus the 1.52 home runs per nine. Home runs are not balls in play, so they don't factor in to that. So you're kind of doubly getting hit hard there. Because part of the home runs aren't factored into balls in play. So that's not great. Look at ERA by the teams. The Orioles bullpen is 28th in baseball since the end of that Yankees series with a 6.47 ERA. The only teams with worst bullpens are the Rockies, who are just terrible in general, and the Mets, who have had a bad bullpen all year. They're right around 500. In terms of like the quality of teams right around the Orioles, it's much less than much lower quality overall than what the Orioles, record has to this point. So that's disappointing. And then if you try to take away some randomness, you put the fielding independent pitching up there. The Orioles do climb a little bit. So they have a 4.38 FIP, which is 20th in baseball. So still, again, below average. And you'd like to see that number a little bit better, maybe around 3.5 or so for a playoff team. Digging into the actual players, the specific players that have had those performances. So as I said, Craig Kimbrel's been very good. He has a 0 ERA since then, has not allowed an earned run, 16.71 strikeouts per nine. He's walking a few too many, almost 4 walks per nine, but he's making up for it with the huge strikeout rate. Keegan Aiken is also striking out a ton of guys, 18 strikeouts per nine, so he's averaging 2 strikeouts per every inning he pitches. His issue has been home runs. Aiken has been getting lit up for home runs, 2.57 home runs per nine, and a 462 batting average on balls in play. His ERA is 5.14 in that time. His FIP is only 3.31. So, his peripherals are better than what his actual numbers say. Dylan Tate, an 11 ERA. He's pitched 9 innings, so he's allowed 11 runs in his last 9 innings. Doesn't surprise anybody that he's no longer on the 26-man roster. He's been optioned to AAA. We'll talk about that in a minute. CNL Perez is the only other one in the bullpen that's been, I think you could say, good recently. No ERA, but his peripherals are a little worrying, which is kind of par for the course with Perez. His peripherals are always a little bit worrying. 5.4 strikeouts per nine, very low, and a 4.05 walks per nine. That's very high. His batting average on balls in play is 111, which is great that it's so low, but its regression is coming. It's the identical batting average on balls in play of Craig Kimbrel, but Kimbrel's you can wrap your head around a little bit more because a lot of his other peripheral numbers are great. Perez's are not. So he's sort of just in the getting lucky bucket that you worry that's going to come down at some point. His xFIP, his expected fielding independent pitching, is 5.75. And then it doesn't get any better from there. Cole Irvin obviously has been terrible, but the caveat for Irvin is He's in a long man spot now, and I think he's pitched twice in this span. Once was in that blowout against the Athletics that the Orioles were out of the game immediately because Povich just really struggled. And then again was the Thursday night game against the Cubs where the Orioles were down 4-0. And Irvin gave them length. He gave them 4 innings, didn't pitch well, but gave them 4 innings, which, as I said before, has some value there. So I'm not going to get too upset about Cole Irvin having a bad ERA. Um, he's come in spots that I don't know the Orioles really, not that they don't care about quality pitching, but it's more about surviving and getting to the next day. And in that regard, he has saved them a little bit. But I mean, it's not a great lineup of dudes right there. It's Kimbrel you feel good about. Aiken's getting strikeouts, but home runs are getting hit off of him. Tate is now in the minors for a reason. Second time this year he's been down there after I think the Orioles probably came into the season thinking he'd be a setup option. That hasn't been the case at all. They don't have Cano on here for some reason. I'll have to look why Cano isn't on here. Maybe I have a qualified filter on. I don't want that. I know Cano's not been good. Okay, yeah, he's 5.4 ERA. He gave up a home run, didn't he? Oh, no, no home runs. But he's walking a lot. Cano's struggling to find the strike zone. 5.4 walks per nine. His FIP is only 257 and his XFIP is 3.16. So he's another one. The peripherals are better than his actuals. If he gets the walks back down into like a realistic zone, which he probably will, 5.4 is really high. He's not usually that kind of a walk guy. Then you probably feel okay about Cano. But it's really like Kimbrel, you feel good giving the ball to at any point. Cano, Cano's like every other. He looks dominant, and the opposite, he looks terrible. But besides that, I don't know who you feel great about handing the ball to right now. Jacob Webb was having a moment there where he seemed like kind of a guy for them in the seventh, eighth inning. That's kind of evaporated, which is not super surprising. It's kind of exactly what he did last year, where he was great. I think that first month when he came over from the Angels, then sort of fell apart. Baker, I think we know what Brian Baker is at this point. He's a guy that can definitely get you a strikeout. So I think he's a guy that, like, a game goes into extra innings, you have the Manfred man on. I don't feel terrible about giving it to Baker because he can get you a strikeout, but he also could give up a double that's gonna, score a run and then put a guy right back in scoring position. So, it's not great for Baker. Vespi, they've yo-yoed up and down. Perez is Perez. I mean, ultimately, he is effective, but it's a roller coaster getting there. And Aiken, I've already talked about. A lot of strikeouts right now, but also giving up home runs, so you don't love that. So there's just a lot of guys there that I don't feel confident giving the ball to in the seventh, eighth inning of a 3-run, 2-run, 1-run game. They just can't. They haven't shown that they can hold those leads right now. So it's bad. It's bad, and it's a bad combination of that plus a rotation right now that I think with Burns and Rodriguez, you feel confident getting through 6, 7 innings on a regular basis. But besides that, I don't think you do. I think Suarez has been pretty good. Even his start against the Cubs last night, his final line, five innings, 4 runs, didn't feel super fair to how his actual performance was. I thought he pitched better than that. But he's in general been pretty good. But he doesn't get through 6 and 7 innings very regularly. He's getting through 5, and then you need 4 innings from the bullpen. That's a lot to ask. Povich had obviously the 1 inning start against the Athletics. He gets a start in game 1 against the Yankees tonight. That's huge. I don't think they need that. Well, as I'm saying this, they don't. He's a rookie. You can't say we need you to get through the lineup 2 full times or even go through to third, start to go through to third, and we expect you to be okay. That's a lot to ask for a rookie. I think if he gets there 2 times, gives you 4 to 5 innings. Brandon Hyde has to feel pretty good about that. But then it becomes, okay, we're handing it to our bullpen that we don't really trust. And then Dean Kramer was really bad this week against the Cubs. But historically, I trust Kramer. He's usually pretty dependable. But this week he got smacked around and it just wasn't a lot of fun, and the game was over pretty early there too. And again, that requires more innings from your bullpen. So clearly, it's a rotation and a bullpen issue altogether. One hand feeds the other, and the Orioles have to do something about it. So they've started to do some things about it. I mentioned this already. So they selected the contract of Birch Smith, who was down in AAA Norfolk. He had signed with the Orioles a few weeks ago after the Marlins let him go So let's take a look at Birch Smith's numbers this season. He's appeared in 25 games for the Marlins, 4.25 ERA, 29 and 2/3 innings. He's got an ERA plus of 104, so slightly above average. 307 FIP. Struck out 23 guys in those 29.2 innings, 9 walks, just 1 home run, so he keeps the ball in the ballpark. The walks aren't crazy. And, you know, he's getting the job done. So that's 2.7 walks per nine, 7.0 strikeouts per nine. So he's a guy that pitches to contact, keeps the game going, but doesn't allow any home runs, which is great. Let's look at his Savant page and see if there's anything interesting there. Let's see, loading. Savant's always good to take a minute to load, but it's a lot of information on there. So you're not going to love the numbers there. He gets a lot of ground balls, doesn't walk guys. So I think it's a guy that, you know, maybe we get some double plays out of. Certainly not a guy that's going to come in and shut things out and rack up the Ks, and you're going to feel great in that regard. But I think it is an improvement over and sort of a replacement of what Dylan Tate has been, which Dylan Tate's just really struggled to this point. He's not really missing bats at all. He's giving up too much hard contact, and Birch Smith can maybe come in and be like, I assume he's a sinker ball, or if his ground ball rate is that high. No, four-seamer, curveball, cutter. Those are his 3 pitches, which 3 pitches, having 3 real pitches as a reliever is pretty impressive. So he might be a guy that can even give you multiple innings here. Let's see. He 25 games, 29 and 2/3. So an inning plus he can do. 1.62 whip, not great. So he gives up some hits. So that's one thing, but again, it's sort of a band-aid on a gunshot wound. Not great there. Then the other move they just made was they traded for Colin Selby from the Royals, just for cash. So nothing crazy there. He's going to go to AAA for now, but he's a guy that I believe has 2 options remaining. So it gives the Orioles some flexibility that they can bring him up and send him back down. They just sent Tate down. He's got options. I know Keegan Aiken has options. Cano, no, I think Cano's out of options. But Selby, talk about him for a minute. 26 years old. He has 23 total games of big league experience. 21 of those came last year with the Pirates, 2 of them this year with the Royals. His career ERA at the big league level is 8.67, so not great. He averages 5.7 walks per nine and 10 strikeouts per nine. But let's look at his minor league numbers with AAA this season. 5.32 ERA in 22 innings. He's struck out 28, but he's walked 11. So that's a 4.5 walks per nine, 11.5 strikeouts per nine. So theoretically, he's a guy that comes up and is wild as anything, strikes guys out. So probably has some velo there. But again, not a lockdown type of dude, but more of a Norfolk shuttle kind of guy because they can't keep shuffling Vespi up nonstop. He's about out of demotions for the year. You can't call a guy up, I think, more than 6 times. There are some stipulations there if it's call ups for injuries or restricted list or paternity list or whatever, they don't count. So he's gotten a couple extra there, but I think they're about out of call ups for Vespi. So they need another guy they can sort of yank up and down, and Selby might be that guy. So I think what we're seeing though is the Orioles starting to say, okay, we've got issues. We've survived the first half essentially. We're going to, they've got 3 games against the Yankees here that obviously there's a range of outcomes there. They can finish up the break 5 games up in the division if they sweep them, or they can finish the break down a game if they get swept. But either way, I think you say, yes, we've survived the first half in a competitive spot. We're going to be on pace to make the playoffs, barring a humongous collapse, which, look, let's not say that's impossible or anything like that. It certainly could happen. But I think you would say mission accomplished there. But now we're getting to late July, our last chance to make big upgrades. We need to shuffle the deck a little bit, and this is part of that. Again, Selby and Smith are not going to save the Orioles bullpen, but it's the beginning of throw anything against the wall and see what sticks. Webb came last year and was pretty good for a month. If they get a good month out of one of these guys, that's a win. But they clearly need to do something else. So what else can they do? Clearly, the trade deadline is coming up. and they need to make a move there. What I would love to see is I would love to have Albert Suarez back in the bullpen. Now that's hard to do because Povich has, well, I won't say Povich has struggled. He had done well up until that athletic start. That was just a disaster. So if Povich comes and shoves against the Yankees tonight, that feels huge because then you can say, all right, Povich is maybe our guy at the back of the rotation. Kramer too. Obviously a bad start against the Cubs, but I think we kind of know what Kramer is. He's not a guy that's going to go win you the game, but he in general is going to keep the Orioles in the game. So I feel okay with Povich and Kramer in the back, but you absolutely need another starter. You need another. You need, I don't think you have to get a guy that is necessarily a Kyle Bradish replacement in terms of a stud ace, which would be Tarek Skubal or Garrett Crochet. I think I have more faith in Skubal than Crochet for 2024. Now, beyond 2024, Crochet, once he's stretched out a little bit more historically, maybe you feel better about him. It's not off the table they go get Skubal or Crochet. I'm kind of just not assuming that they will. So what I'm sort of more expecting is a 2 or a 3 type that I would feel okay about. And then even though Suarez has been better than I think both Kramer and Povich in the rotation, I would love Suarez's skill set in the bullpen. The fastball plays, it plays up a little bit more in the bullpen. He gets whiffs on it. Would love to have Suarez back in the bullpen. Then besides that, you got to start looking at trades for pitch for rotation help. Say you get that number 3, maybe you go get Eric Fetty. I don't love that plan, but people are talking about it and it feels like a fit. If they go get Eric Fetty, maybe they could get Michael Kopech in that deal too. I don't really know if the White Sox are going to want to do that. You typically get more when you separate your assets and trade them that way to multiple teams versus packaging them. So the White Sox might not want to do that. But you can get a Kopech, you get a Tyler Rogers from the Giants if the Giants are selling. They've talked about Tanner Scott from the Marlins. That's a lefty option. I think that's not a bad idea. He's wild as anything. We know that. When you talk about the retreads, I always worry a little bit that they've been here, done that. The Orioles have tried. They've tried with the Elias regime. It hasn't worked. He got the change of scenery to the Marlins, was wild, but has gotten better, and now seems to have figured it out a little bit. Do you want to, you know, put him back in a situation where he again had flashes, but there's a reason you traded him away? I don't know about that. But they need to make trades. And, I could sit here and list 50 different bullpen arms. I, I think it's kind of impossible to say who they should go get because basically any reliever is available if the team is not within shouting distance of a playoff spot. I don't think any team thinks, oh, this 23-year-old that is great in the bullpen this year is going to be great 4 years from now. I mean, it sounds like the Athletics are going to hold on to Mason Miller. If I was the Athletics and you could get a king's ransom for him, a dude that's throwing 100 miles an hour has already had arm trouble, I would trade Mason Miller for as much as I can get. But I don't run the Athletics. In general, relievers are so volatile that I think any team that thinks they can capitalize on a hot season from a reliever can and will do it. So the Orioles might have their eyes on somebody that's sort of off the beaten path right now that could really fit and make this team a lot better. And they should go do that. Now, what's the cost going to be for those guys? I don't see the Orioles as willing to part with a Basayo, a Mayo, a Kerstad. I think Holiday's probably untouchable. Um, I don't see them parting with those guys for a reliever, no matter how good they may think the reliever is. So I would imagine they stand pat there, but I do think a Connor Norby would be on the table, a Kyle Stowers, although I know he's not a prospect anymore at this point, but Stowers has a lot of team control left. I think he's a guy that steps right into a major league roster most places that don't have the traffic jam in the outfield that the Orioles have. So I think Kyle Stowers can make a lot of sense. Who else? There's other prospects, Judd Fabian, uh, basically Dylan Beavers. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Basically any hitting prospects. I think I won't say the Orioles have any pitching prospects that are off limits, but the Orioles are so thin in the pitching department right now that I can't see them moving a Seth Johnson, a Chase McDermott, any of those guys, because that's sort of another element that I wanted to touch on was that they're not they could pull a Texas Rangers and go get 4 new guys for this bullpen. What I think is more likely is they, as I said, supplement the rotation with somebody that pushes a Suarez back to the bullpen. That, I won't say that that solves anything for sure, but it feels a lot better to have Suarez in the bullpen. You trade for a guy, maybe two, that are dependable arms that maybe you have an extra year of control over for 2025, maybe longer. And then you look at the minor leagues and say, all right, who can we call up and maybe give them a taste this year? Because we're not gonna have Povich and McDermott and Johnson in the rotation. And even if we wanted to, Povich is the one that comes with the highest ceiling. So let's see what he can do for a while before we kind of freak out there. I think Chase McDermott, let me look up Chase McDermott's numbers because they're unique. I'll say they're unique. So McDermott, about to be 26 years old in August. He is striking out 13 per 9 down in AAA. He's also walking 5 per 9. His ERA is 4, his FIP is 4.08, and his xFIP is 4.24. So basically what you see is what you get with him. What maybe you could see is if he goes into shorter outings, he could pare down his pitch selection a little bit and really shove down there and show what he can do. He's already thrown 83 and a third innings this year. Last year, he threw 50 and 2/3 in AAA and 68 and a third in AA. So quick maths, that's 100 and almost 120 innings. So he's not going to throw 100. Well, he'll throw 120 this year, I guess, but they're not going to push him too far beyond that. So why not at some point say, all right, Chase, you've thrown your 120 innings as a starter. Let's ratchet you down. Let's bring you up and use you in middle relief for the Orioles major league team for a little while. See what you can do. Maybe by the time the playoffs roll around, we're ready to give you a higher leverage workload. He's Rule 5 eligible in December anyway. They're going to protect him. Maybe he's a trade chip, as I just said. I just don't see the Orioles trading him given the lack of big league pitching talent they have available to them right now. He's one of the few. So I don't think you're going to trade that away. But he could be a big play or a helpful option for them down the stretch here. So I think that could be worth a shout. Seth Johnson's another one. He's in AA, but he's already on the Orioles 40-man roster because he had some arm stuff that has sort of slowed down his progression or his growth. So he's at AA, but has pitched really well. 9 strikeouts per 9, 5.37 walks per 9, 2.84 ERA. I was looking at the Orioles' top 45 prospects on Fangraphs, and I think Johnson has a thing. Here, let me find it. They had him ranked 16th. For reference, they had Povich 5th, McDermott 8th, Johnson down at 16th. But Johnson, they have him projected as a single inning relief pitcher. It says, we think a shift to relief could come with a velo bump and enable Johnson to be a good bullpen's third banana. So basically a 7th inning guy, which, I mean, that feels great. That feels like about what the Orioles need this year. He's had arm stuff. He's already thrown, what's he thrown this year? He's thrown 57 innings this year. Last year, he threw an inning in the complex league, 2 innings in low A, 4 1/3 in high A, and 3 innings in double A. I don't see the Orioles pushing him too much more this year. I mean, 57 is not a lot, but he threw what, 10 last year, 27 in 22, and 93 and 2/3 in 2021. So 3 years ago, he was at 93. If they think he's a single inning relief pitcher eventually, maybe we ratchet him down this year, let him get a velo bump, see what that looks like, because he's already on your 40-man. You kind of got to figure things out with him a little bit. It could be worth a shot there too. So I think Johnson and McDermott are 2 guys that I would keep an eye on. His walks are a little high, but again, he's probably trying out some secondary stuff that might not be landing quite right. You pair that down, use that fastball that could come with a velo bump as Fangraphs expects it to, and there could be some exciting stuff there. He's got a 60 grade cutter. He's tops out at 97. sits 93, 96, tops 97 already. It's pretty tantalizing to say, hey man, you don't got to throw 90 pitches today. You got to throw 20. Let's pump those numbers up a little bit. I think that could be kind of exciting too. So, there's no guarantee either one of those works, but I think if you say, hey, maybe one of those dudes works out, now you're talking about a bullpen that I find a little more interesting. You got Albert Suarez down there. You got Chase McDermott or Seth Johnson, maybe both shoving in shorter stints. You've got one or two outside additions. I maybe that's a Tanner Scott, maybe that's a Michael Kopech, maybe that's a Tyler Rogers. You name your flavor of relief pitcher on a bad team, and they could fit into what the Orioles need. Now, the issue, of course, is every team needs bullpen help. The Yankees need bullpen help. The Mets I just talked about, they're a 500 team, but if they're going to make a push, they need bullpen help. A lot of teams need bullpen help, and it's going to be expensive relative to what the value is. But do the Orioles think that in this moment, these 2024 Orioles who have Corbin Burnes for right now, maybe they re-sign him, I don't know, but for right now, you have him. You have Gunnar playing at an MVP level. Look, Gunnar's fantastic. Maybe he's just getting started. He's going to be an 11 WAR player every single season, but this could also be the best he ever is. That doesn't mean he'll be bad beyond this, but if this is his absolute best form, let's take advantage of that. Let's supplement this roster with what we need to do. Are we willing to pay the price to make that happen? Like I said, I don't think they're going to go Basayo, Mayo, Kerstad for relievers, but are you okay with a Beavers, a Norby? Probably okay with a Norby. I don't think they feel like they lose all that much in Norby simply because there's so much infield depth. So do you feel okay with losing a Norby? What about a Beavers? What about a Bradfield? Is Bradfield the future in center field? Do they not care? Let's look at the rest of the Fangraphs list here and see who we'd be willing to part with. If you go down to fifth, that's Povich. Sixth is Cowser. Is Cowser movable? Or is he the future in center field? Bradfield seventh. McDermott, I already said I don't think they move a pitcher. Beavers is ninth. Brandon Young 10th. Brandon Young's another interesting one for the bullpen. Starter right now. Has pitched well. He could be an option. Fabian 11th. I think maybe they'd move him. Luis De Leon, I don't think they're moving him. He's been a big riser. Jackson Ballmeister, Juan Nunez, both pitchers. Frederick Ben Cosma. I think now you're getting to the point where, okay, yeah, like we'll give up any of these guys essentially for the right guy, for the right bullpen arm. I think that makes sense. Then you get down to Mac Horvath, who's got some projectability, but has struggled a little bit this year. Then I think you get down here where there's pitchers. Maybe you'd move some of these guys. Armbruster's in AAA. Maybe he could be a bullpen option, but hasn't pitched great this year. So I think you're probably not giving up a pitcher that's in your top 13. I think I've heard they like Ballmeister. I've heard DeLeon is a big riser. So maybe like past Ballmeister, you're okay with pitchers. I think above Ballmeister, you're okay with Beavers going, although he's had a nice season. I think you're okay with Fabian going simply because do you think Fabian or Beavers is more interesting than Cowser, Kerstad, Mayo potentially if he's your right fielder? Probably not. And you're getting to the point where, all right, we're in win now mode. Like, yeah, we need minor league depth, but we need big league pitching more. This has been the thing that people have talked about for a long time is there was a big difference in the quality of pitching and the quality of position players in the minor league system for the Orioles. Eventually, they were going to have to swap some of the position players for pitching. Haven't really done it yet. They traded Joey Ortiz to get Corbin Burnes, but besides that, haven't really made any other big swings that have traded position player for pitching. And I think we're definitely at the point where we're seeing it on the big league stage, right? Is we don't have the pitching. Yes, the bats had a bad week, but in general, look at the runs scored, look at the slugging, look at the everything. The Orioles offense is good. And the pitching has been good, but they've been hit with injuries. Bradish, Means, Wells, they're out. They're out of pitching depth. They need something. And my expectation is they're not going to trade pitching for pitching, but they will trade position players for position players. So that'll be something to look out for. But until Elias proves otherwise, I'm not expecting him to cough up his absolute highly coveted guys. So not Holiday, not Basayo, not Mayo. And I don't have a problem with that, but you got to pay some kind of price because this team is just too good to let them wither on the vine because the bullpen wasn't good, which is, you know, the most common complaint for all Major League Baseball teams, but the Orioles can't let that be a downfall for them. So that's sort of my expectation and something I'll be watching for these next, 2 to 3 weeks heading into the deadline is how do they perform? Obviously, we've got basically a 5-day gap coming up with the All-Star game, but beyond that, it's a big like 10-day sprint for the team after the All-Star break to see what do we got and evaluate some things. So that's sort of my expectation going into things. I'm definitely not at the panic button stage yet. It's the Orioles are in a swoon right now, but it's not a Yankees level swoon of the worst team in baseball. It's a 500-ish level swoon in which the bullpen has really struggled because the rotation is lacking in some depth. So get a starter, bump Suarez down, make a trade or two for a bullpen arm, and I think the Orioles feel pretty good about where things are right now. But we'll see. I'll be pleasantly surprised if the Orioles do something and go get a Skubal or a um a Garrett Crochet. That would be pretty massive. And I think if I had to pick one of those top players to go, it's probably Basayo, simply because there are doubts about him staying at catcher. And while his bat is fantastic, if he's a first baseman DH instead of a catcher, that means his bat needs to be Yordan Alvarez level. And who's to say it's not? But that would be my only concern. He's not going to be playing a premium position anymore. He's going to be playing sort of I don't know. You can find offense everywhere. Pick up a rock, and you can find offense at first base. So that would change things a little bit for me. But I probably wouldn't trade Mayo. He's just too close to the big leagues, and he can play a corner outfield spot, which has some value there. And Holiday, I think Holiday just fits this current team so well that if he can pull things together a little bit, you plug him in at second base with his defense and his speed, and hopefully his bat just gives you something at the bottom of the order for this year. I think you feel pretty good about that. So that's sort of my read right now. I think we're going to probably do an episode here in a week or two, try to get all of us together, myself, Jesse, and Eli, and talk about the trade deadline expectations and hopes and dreams and all that stuff. So we haven't planned that out just yet, but that's something I'm sure we'll do. But just kind of want to get those feelings out there right now about the bullpen being the one spot right now that I'm worried about. I think I feel great about the top of the rotation. You add a middle rotation piece that improves the bullpen, and the offense I feel good about. Clearly wasn't the offense's best week, but they've shown me enough that I'm not gonna freak out about it just yet. But that's all I've got for this episode of the Warehouse Podcast. If you guys want to get involved with the show, please follow us on Twitter and Threads at the Warehouse Pod. You can subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. Just search the Warehouse Podcast. Will pop up at the top. It's free to subscribe. And if you're listening to us just in normal podcast form, please give us a subscription on your preferred podcast platform, Apple Pod, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcast. We should be right there. And give us a rating and a review, 5 stars, thumbs up, all that jazz would be great. Helps us reach more Orioles fans, and we really appreciate it. But that's all we've got. So again, this has been the Warehouse Podcast. We're part of the Believe Podcast Network, and our sponsor this week has been Bet Online. So give them some support, and that helps us out as well. Thanks again. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Tyler. And go O's.